Hello again, this is part 2 of that video of measuring and tailoring for the, shall we say, atypical figure. It wasn't until I'd finished that other one that I went, hang on a minute, I've got something more to say. So in addition to the measurements that I talked about and the concern about the forward angle of the client's pelvis, his hips, when we're dealing with the unusual figure, it isn't just enough to take the measurements. As I said, I have pictures of him for the front and rear and from the side, so that I can keep in a mental image of his figure, and we call that rack of eye. Many times with experience, you can do it entirely from memory, but I don't trust my memory in a case like this. The second thing too is because we're dealing with an unusual figure, and I'd hoped to be able, by the way, I'd hoped to be able to shoot this with my original model present, but he's busy, and if eventually he's going to figure out that I'm actually making him a kilt here. It's a surprise for his graduation, so for his master's. So in any case, in addition to the measurements, in addition to the pictures and paying attention to the peculiarity, shall we say, of the figure, I also, when he came by today, briefly, I made a point of measuring, just looking to see how wide the apron should be on his particular figure. Because normally we don't want anything smaller than the crown of the pelvis, the points of the pelvis. And normally on a larger figure, we want a larger apron up to 50% of his total waist size. But that's not a sure thing. So I made a point of measuring him and looking and then mentally recording that number. So now I've got the cloth unrolled in front of me. This is 8 yards of Mackenzie number 2, which is to say the Highland Light Infantry tartan. His family wears the Mackenzie tartan. His middle name's Mackenzie. But I've chosen this because the scale of the design is larger than you normally see. And he's a larger guy, so a larger pattern is more flattering. A small pattern looks ghastly on a very big fellow. So I've laid out the cloth. This is an 8-yard piece, but because of his dimensions, he's got a 53 waist, 56 hip, which could be worse because you will encounter people where the waist is greater than the hip, and that's going to be a separate video series because that's a whole nother ball of wax. So what I'm going to do with a 53 waist, I'm going to splice in another 2 yards of cloth in the middle. The length of a material in a kilt, the amount of material used in a kilt is not a barometer of how good the kilt is, or how high quality the kilt is. But when we get beyond a certain dimension, we need longer cloth, because otherwise we're not going to be able to get the proper apron pleats and the rest, and it's not going to hang properly. So this kilt is going to be a full 10 yards. The other consideration, because it's a Mackenzie kilt, because the Mackenzie is worn by the Seaforth Highlanders and the Seaforths are based in Vancouver, there's rather a lot of Mackenzie tartan around. So one of the things I'm doing, because the problem when you're working with the material in a garrison town is if you produce a kilt in the same tartan as the regiment in the garrison, people will look at that kilt, and no matter how beautifully you've tailored it, somebody's going to say, oh yeah, where'd you get that from the unit? They'll think it's surplus or it's gone missing or something like that. So that gives us a rather unfortunate circumstance to deal with. And one of the ways I'm dealing with it is I'm making it subtly different from a Seaforth kilt. The Seaforth kilt has a red line down the center of the apron. I'm shifting it so that, again, like the Highland Light Infantry, the center of the apron is going to be the blank space, as it were, between the two red lines. This, again, it's unfortunate that we have to be reacting to circumstances. We're making a point of not looking Seaforth, but it does give us a certain advantage because it puts more vertical lines in the front apron. Of course, vertical lines give us a slimming, and also, well, he doesn't need a heightening effect because he's already like 6'6", 6'5". But vertical lines, a strong vertical element, gives us a slimming effect, and that will help with the front apron. His sporran will be here, of course, so that will help with the front apron. I think I'm going to be stuck having to pleat it to the stripe. Again, unfortunately, that makes it look a little bit more like a Seaforth Highlanders kilt, which is why their old nickname used to be the Silver Streak-It Seaforths, with the white lines in the backs of the kilt. But we need that slimming effect. We need that vertical effect. And because if by pleating it to the set, so that the set appeared across the back of the pleats, it's not going to be flattering. It's not going to be slimming. So those are my decisions. That's what I'm going for. So my next stage is to rip out the cloth. Well, my next stage is to calculate the pleat widths and then rip out the cloth, splice in that extra couple of yards, and then pretty much carry on as normal. One other thing, and one other important factor when tailoring for the atypical, the unusual figure, normally I can get away with one fitting, an initial measurement and then a final fitting at the end. But in this case, because of his stalwart physique, and again, very fortunately, he's proportional. The worst type, the hardest type to tailor for, are the ones with the huge guts and tiny bums, no legs. Terrible challenge to tailor for. But in this case, rather than a final fitting, I'm going to do an initial trial fitting after I've sewn the pleats and put in the canvas, but haven't shaped the aprons. I'm going to go over and fit it to them, and then double check to see how that apron is going to look. And then I'm going to carry on from there, and then I'm going to have what we call a forward fitting, where the pleats, the aprons, everything else is basically done. I'll fit it to them, just see how it hangs, because sometimes when you're laying cloth flat out, it's going to be almost quite frequently actually, when you lay and tailor cloth flat on the bench, it's going to behave differently when it's hanging. So that second fitting, I'm going to one last check to see that straps and the buckles are in the right places, and also to see how the cloth is hanging, because maybe, like here, we've got that inner pleat that theoretically was right, but after a while of wearing it, you can see that it's curled forward like that. So I'm going to hang the cloth from him, and I'm going to, if need be, I'm going to take something like this and baste it down with white thread, because the cloth itself, under the effect of gravity and his physique, is going to show me what to do. This is more work, but it pays off in the end for a couple of reasons. First off, we're giving absolutely the best customer service. We're getting the best fit that we can possibly achieve. And the customer appreciates it because he's being fussed over, and the effort is being taken to make sure that he is being tailored to and tailored properly. So thank you very much for this. I'm not sure if there's going to be another episode in this, because I'm trying to get this done on time, and also largely without him figuring out that this thing is going to be, I'm actually making him a kilt. Some aspects of this I'm not really sure are going to turn out, because again, we have that forward slant to his pelvis, which I'm not sure how I'm going to deal with that yet. So I'm pretty much going to be discovering processes as I go. I'll make a note of them at the time, and hopefully, or one would hope, I'll be able to sum up at the end and say, here are the lessons learned, so that everybody benefits by it. So thank you, and carry on.